Imagine a grand palace filled with history and secrets. A king sits on his throne, but he is tired. He is fighting a battle that no one can see, and he knows he cannot do it alone. So he turns to the one person he trusts most in the world, his sister. This is a story about loyalty, about duty, and about a princess who has been the backbone of the monarchy for decades. It all started with a diagnosis. In early 2024, King Charles learned he had cancer. The news shook the palace. The public was told he was in good spirits and continuing to work, but behind the scenes, something was shifting. Princess Anne quietly stepped in to represent him at countless events. She attended ceremonies, honored public commitments, and kept the crown visible while her brother was fighting something invisible. And she did not just do it a few times. In 2024, Princess Anne carried out more than 217 public engagements, the most by any working senior royal that year. She did this despite suffering a concussion after a riding accident. She literally fell off a horse, injured her head, and then went back to work and still outpaced everyone else in the family. That is not a sudden decision to step up. That is a person who has been stepping up for decades and just kept doing it when things got hard. So when reports started circulating about a dramatic night meeting at Buckingham Palace, an unscheduled private audience where King Charles supposedly summoned Princess Anne to hand her full authority, I have to be honest. My first thought was, wait, what exactly changed? Because from the outside, it looks like Anne has been running half the show already. The meeting itself is being described in very breathless terms. Aides were reportedly removed from the corridor. The meeting did not appear on any official schedule, no press release, no carefully worded statement about routine royal business. And look, I get why that sounds dramatic. Buckingham Palace is one of the most schedule-obsessed institutions on the planet. Every engagement is logged, briefed, coordinated through layers of staff. An unscheduled meeting in the middle of the night with staff cleared from the halls, that does not happen by accident. That happens when someone inside the palace has decided that what is about to occur cannot risk being witnessed by the wrong eyes. But here is where I think we need to pump the brakes a little on the intrigue and look at what actually makes sense. King Charles is dealing with a serious health situation. He is tired. Sources describe him as visibly exhausted but not uncertain, and that distinction matters. Exhaustion is physical, uncertainty is structural. Charles may be carrying the weight of illness in his body, but the decision to rely more heavily on Anne is not something he cooked up overnight. This is a man who at his coronation in May 2023 made his sister the gold stick in waiting. She rode on horseback leading 6,000 members of the armed forces as they escorted him through London. That was a symbolic and personal moment, a sign that Charles trusted no one more than Anne to stand beside him on the most important day of his life. Later that same year, Parliament officially recognized that trust when Anne was added as a Councillor of State, meaning she is allowed to perform royal duties if the king is unable to. Traditionally, that position goes to the monarch's spouse and the next 4 adults in the line of succession, but Charles made sure his sister was included. He did not have to do that, he chose to. So this supposed shocking decision to hand Anne full authority feels less like a sudden twist and more like the formal recognition of something that has been true for years. The only thing that changed is that now it is official and perhaps now it is more comprehensive. But the foundation was laid long before any midnight meeting. Which brings us to the question that I think is actually more interesting than whether the meeting happened. Why Anne? Why not Prince William? Why not Queen Camilla? Because if you're going to hand over palace authority, the obvious choices would seem to be your heir or your wife. But when you dig into the dynamics here, the logic of choosing Anne becomes pretty undeniable. Let us talk about the relationship between King Charles and Princess Anne first because it explains a lot. They were born just 21 months apart. Charles in November 1948 and Anne in August 1950. That small age gap made them each other's first real companions in a world where very few people could understand what it meant to grow up royal. Their parents were away constantly on royal tour. Charles and Anne spent most of their time together as kids, playing, studying, exploring palace grounds side by side. They did not have the freedom most children enjoyed, but they had each other. And that made the strange, structured life of royalty easier to bear. Those early years formed a lifelong connection. Charles was sensitive and thoughtful, a boy who loved art, nature, and music. Anne was confident, direct, and unshakably practical. Where he hesitated, she acted. Where he doubted himself, she gave him courage. Their differences did not pull them apart, they completed each other. One of the strongest signs of that bond came during Charles's years at Gordonstoun, that strict Scottish boarding school his father insisted he attend. Charles famously hated it. He described it as cold, with kilts, harsh weather, tough discipline, and isolation making him miserable. Through all of that, Anne was one of the few people he confided in. She listened without judgment and defended him from teasing within royal circles. That kind of loyalty was rare, even in a family that valued duty above all. As adults, that bond continued through moments of deep personal trial. In the 80s and 90s, when Charles's troubled marriage to Princess Diana made headlines around the world, Anne did not take sides or add fuel to the media fire. She avoided interviews, refused gossip, and offered quiet comfort to her brother. She stood by him when his public image was at its lowest, not as a royal, but as a sister who knew the weight he carried. More recently, after the death of their parents, Anne and Charles were often seen together at key events. They walked side by side during Queen Elizabeth's funeral procession, exchanging private words at memorial services. In those emotional moments, you could see their shared grief, but also their comfort in having each other close. So when you ask why Anne and not someone else, part of the answer is simply that this is the person who has known Charles the longest, who has seen him at his worst, and who has never once wavered in her support. That is not something you could replicate with protocol or titles. But there is more to it than just sibling loyalty. Princess Anne has a reputation within the family for bringing order when things start to fall apart. She has been called the family's backbone, and she earned that title through decades of hard work. She took her first royal tour at just 19, joining her parents on a month-long trip to Australia and New Zealand. That same year in 1970, she became the president of Save the Children UK. She did not just lend her name. She traveled, spoke, and visited some of the world's poorest communities. For nearly 50 years, she used her position to push for real change, making her one of the most respected royals internationally. Queen Elizabeth saw Anne's tireless effort as diplomacy, a way to show the world that the crown still cared, that it had a human face. And in times when other royals faced scandals or criticism, Anne's record remained spotless. She did not chase attention or glamour. She simply showed up and did the job. Public polling backs this up. Princess Anne consistently ranks as one of the most positively viewed senior members of the royal family, with about 70% of Britons expressing a favorable opinion of her. She ranks third in popularity just behind William and Catherine. That is not just about likability. It reflects trust. Few royals enjoy that level of positive perception while staying largely out of tabloid drama. For a monarchy, high ratings reinforce her role as a steady hand in a family often buffeted by controversy and change. So when you look at the full picture, King Charles choosing Anne to take on more authority is not shocking at all. It is almost the only choice that makes sense. William is the heir, yes, but William also has a young family and his own set of responsibilities. He's being prepared for kingship, but that is a long-term project. Camilla is the queen consort, but her role is constitutionally different. She supports the king. She does not step in for the king in the same way a counselor of state can. Anne, on the other hand, is already a counselor of state. She already has the constitutional authority. She already has the public trust. She already has decades of experience. And she already has Charles's complete personal confidence. It would be weird if he did not turn to her. Now, there is another layer to this story that I think deserves attention because it complicates the narrative in an interesting way. There have been reports of tension between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla, and if those reports are accurate, they add a whole different dimension to why Anne's elevated role matters. The story goes that during a royal banquet, an event that should have been all elegance and polite conversation, Anne turned to Camilla and said something that cut through the room. According to palace sources, she said, "You are the queen consort, not the queen." The room reportedly went still. Now, whether those exact words were spoken in that exact way, we will probably never know. But the sentiment behind them tracks with everything we know about Anne. She was fiercely loyal to her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had quietly insisted that Camilla should remain queen consort, a respectful nod to tradition and the enduring shadow of Princess Diana. Anne reportedly reminded Camilla of this more than once, saying, "The queen said you should remain queen consort. That is what she wanted." The accusation, according to sources, was that Camilla had been overreaching, expanding her influence within the royal circle, subtly redefining the family's inner structure. What had once been whispers of discontent became a silent battle of wills playing out in glances and guarded conversations. And at the center of it stood King Charles, pulled between a sister protecting their mother's legacy and a wife shaping a new chapter of the monarchy. If this is true, and I want to be clear that we are dealing with anonymous palace sources here, so we cannot verify every detail, but if it is true, then Charles's decision to elevate Anne takes on additional significance. It is not just a practical move to ensure stability during his illness. It is also a statement about whose judgment he trusts most when it comes to the institution itself. By giving Anne full authority over key palace responsibilities, he is effectively saying that when he cannot be there, Anne's voice carries the weight, not Camilla's. That is a significant choice, and it would explain why the meeting happened the way it reportedly did, without schedule, without announcement, without the usual machinery of palace communication softening the impact. Of course, there's also the material side of this story, and it connects to Anne's position in a way that is less about palace intrigue and more about practical family finances. Princess Anne lives at Gatcombe Park, a 730-acre estate in Gloucestershire that Queen Elizabeth II purchased in 1976 for somewhere between £500,000 and £750,000. Today, Gatcombe Park is valued at approximately £15 million. It is a vast property that includes a manor house, stables, and additional homes occupied by Anne's children, Zara Tyndall and Peter Phillips. Anne is widely expected to leave this estate to her children, but that inheritance comes with a significant challenge. In the United Kingdom, inheritance tax is charged at 40% on any estate exceeding the £325,000 threshold. For Zara and Peter, inheriting Gatcombe Park could mean facing an inheritance tax bill of around £2.28 million. That is a substantial financial burden that would need to be addressed within 6 months of the inheritance. Now there are ways to mitigate this. The spousal exemption, for one. If Princess Anne's estate passes to her husband, Sir Timothy Lawrence, the transfer of Gatcombe Park would not be subject to inheritance tax. Assets passed to a spouse or civil partner are exempt. The surviving spouse can continue to hold the property without incurring any taxes, and when they eventually pass away, the exemption can be transferred, increasing the amount that can be passed on tax-free. There's also the nil rate band and residence nil rate band, which together can provide up to £500,000 in tax-free allowance per person if the property is passed to direct descendants. Gifting assets during Anne's lifetime is another strategy. Under UK law, gifts made during life are exempt from inheritance tax, provided the donor survives for 7 years after making the gift. Anne could gradually transfer portions of the estate to her children over time, spreading the tax burden and avoiding a large bill all at once. Trusts are another option. A discretionary trust would allow Anne to pass assets to her heirs without specifying an exact beneficiary, with trustees deciding who benefits and potentially spreading the inheritance tax burden across generations. And if parts of Gatcombe Park are used for agricultural purposes, it might qualify for agricultural property relief, which allows agricultural property to be passed on without incurring inheritance tax, provided certain conditions are met. All of which is to say the family has options. Gatcombe Park holds high sentimental value for Princess Anne and her children. It is very unlikely to be sold, but managing that transition requires careful planning, and it is the kind of planning that becomes more urgent when the head of the family is facing a serious illness and the entire structure of royal responsibilities is being reconsidered. This brings us to Sir Timothy Lawrence himself, who is an interesting figure in all of this. For decades, he existed in the soft margins of Britain's royal world, present, steadfast, and almost invisible. His name rarely appears in headlines. His voice is seldom heard beyond palace walls. He is not a prince, not a man of spectacle, but those who watch the royal family closely know that silence in the House of Windsor is often a strategy, and Sir Timothy has mastered it. Born in 1955, he built his life on discipline. A career naval officer, he graduated from the University of Durham, trained with precision, and climbed through the Royal Navy's ranks with quiet distinction. His colleagues described him as methodical, unfailingly polite, and discreet. In the 1980s, he was appointed as an equerry to Queen Elizabeth II, becoming part of the inner machinery of the royal household. He organized schedules, accompanied the Queen on engagements, and learned to navigate the delicate balance between service and secrecy. And it was within that duty that he met Princess Anne. At the time, Anne's marriage to Captain Mark Phillips was unraveling. The press swarmed around every shadow of scandal, but within that turbulence a quiet companionship formed. Timothy Lawrence was different from those around her. Disciplined but kind, reserved but steady. Over time, professional trust deepened into something more personal. By 1992, they married in a modest ceremony in Crathy Kirk near Balmoral, a royal wedding stripped of pageantry, defined instead by sincerity. And unlike many who enter the royal circle, he received no title, no princely honors, no official role. He became simply her husband, a man without crown or courtly rank, standing 2 steps behind yet always beside her. Through decades of state occasions, foreign tour, funerals, and family crises, Sir Timothy was there not as the center of attention but as the steady presence behind it. His loyalty was quiet but unwavering, his composure unbroken. To the public, he was the man in the background, To the family, he was something far rarer, dependable. So when King Charles recently conferred upon him the title of Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, those who understand the hidden language of monarchy took notice. This was not a routine gesture, it was a message. After 30 years of faithful service to the crown, to Anne, and to the quiet dignity of duty, the man who never sought a title has finally been given one. The timing of that honor, coming as it does alongside Anne's elevation in palace authority, cannot be accidental. In the royal world, every medal carries meaning, and every ribbon whispers intent. So where does all of this leave us? We have a king dealing with cancer who has formally placed his sister in a position of unprecedented authority. We have a princess royal who has been quietly running the show for years, and is now being officially recognized for it. We have a queen consort who, if the reports are accurate, has been reminded of the limits of her role. We have an Aaron William who is being prepared for kingship, but not yet asked to carry the full weight of the institution. And we have a family estate at Gatcombe Park that will require careful financial planning to pass to the next generation without a massive tax bill. The official story is that this was a shocking decision, a stunning royal twist that has sent shock waves through Britain. But when you actually look at the facts, when you trace the relationship between Charles and Anne back to their childhood, when you look at Anne's decades of service, her constitutional position as Counselor of State, her public approval ratings, her reputation as the family's backbone, it stops looking shocking and starts looking inevitable. The only surprising thing is that it took this long to make it official. What I think is actually happening here is that King Charles is doing what any sensible leader does when facing uncertainty. He is putting the most reliable person he knows in charge of keeping things stable. That person happens to be his sister. Not because of drama, not because of palace intrigue, but because she is the one who has never let him down. The midnight meeting, the cleared corridors, the sealed dispatch, all of that makes for good theater. But the real story is simpler and in its own way more meaningful. When everything was on the line, the king turned to the person who has been there since the beginning.